The moment my wife's hand touched my shoulder, a shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold air of the salon, nothing to do with the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. It was something deeper, something that reached into the part of me I had spent years pretending didn't exist. The chair beneath me felt both familiar and alien, the vinyl cool and unyielding, while the mirrors surrounding me multiplied my reflection in every angle, every shadow, every flicker of doubt. Her eyes held that look, half teasing, half reverent, like she was about to unveil a secret about me I hadn't dared explore, and yet somehow had always known was there. The idea had begun as a joke, a laugh shared over wine, a casual comment about trying on her dresses, a fleeting imagining of something absurd. But laughter had dissolved the moment she suggested we make it real tonight, right here in the salon. And now, seated beneath the warm, sterile lights, my heart thundering, I felt a strange cocktail of fear and anticipation, as if standing on the edge of a cliff with someone whispering, "Trust me," while holding out their hand. Her fingers traced my hair with deliberate tenderness, testing its texture, guiding my movements without a word. The stylist approached with the quiet authority of someone who had done this 100 times, their scissors gleaming, poised to alter everything I thought I knew about myself. The first snip startled me. A lock of hair fell to the floor, soft as a feather, and I caught my own breath in shock. With every passing minute, my face, my hair, my very shape felt less like what I had known, and more like a carefully sculpted version of something I hadn't realized I wanted to become. There was a tension in my chest, an aching curiosity, a trembling thrill that I could neither name nor dismiss. Makeup followed, a brush, a palette, a swirl of color that felt almost sacramental in its intimacy. Her hand guided mine at first, steadying, instructing, coaxing, before I dared to touch the colors myself. It was strange, almost holy. The way pigments could reshape my identity, how each stroke softened my jawline, highlighted my cheekbones, and illuminated eyes I had always considered ordinary. I studied the reflection in the mirror, noticing the subtle curve of my eyebrows, the delicate hint of blush, the way shadows played across my face differently now. A stranger's gaze met my own, yet somehow it felt like recognition, like a truth I had denied for years finally being allowed to exist. Clothing came next. Silks and satins, fabrics I had never worn, yet felt as though they were made for me, draping across my frame, accentuating curves I hadn't acknowledged. Each layer carried a weight of vulnerability and liberation, as if I were shedding not just old clothes but old expectations, old fears, old versions of myself that no longer fit. My hands shook slightly as I smoothed the folds, feeling the fabric against my skin in ways that awakened an unfamiliar confidence, and yet left me exposed in a way that was dizzying. My wife's quiet presence never wavered, her smile steady, her eyes filled with something I couldn't name: love, curiosity, awe, and something dangerous: encouragement. "You're beautiful," she said, and for a moment, the words struck me like lightning. It wasn't just the reflection I saw, the hair, the makeup, the dress. It was the possibility of existing differently, of inhabiting a self I had never permitted. The mirrors multiplied me in every direction, a kaleidoscope of possibilities, each one whispering, coaxing, daring me to take a step I had long feared. Time seemed suspended. Each brushstroke, each snip, each careful adjustment of clothing felt ritualistic, transformative, almost cinematic in its intensity. There were moments of panic, yes, moments where the reflection startled me, moments where the thrill of the unknown surged too quickly, and yet there were also moments of wonder, of quiet awe, of recognition. I found myself smiling nervously, feeling a warmth bloom in my chest that was equal parts terror and joy. With every passing minute, I felt less like a man in borrowed finery and more like someone being unveiled, someone discovered, someone alive in ways I hadn't imagined. And when it was done, when the stylist stepped back and the last brushstroke of color kissed my skin, the silence that filled the room was profound. My wife's hand found mine again, gentle, insistent. "Look at me," she said softly, and I did. The eyes that looked back were mine, yet they weren't. They were softer, more open, curious, unafraid. And for the first time, I realized that beauty wasn't just something that could be seen, it was something that could be felt, claimed, and lived. In that instant, surrounded by mirrors and lights and love, I understood that who I was could be more than I had ever dared imagine. The first time I moved my hands over the new curves of my body, I realized that nothing about me had prepared me for this. The fabric of the dress clung gently, almost possessively, reminding me with every shift that I was no longer simply myself in the mirror. I was something else, something fragile, yet undeniably alive. My chest tightened, not from fear, not entirely, but from the strange rush of discovery, the kind of discovery that unsettles and thrills all at once. I traced the line of my jaw with trembling fingers, feeling the softness there, the subtle slope I had never noticed before, and a rush of disbelief coursed through me. Was this me? Could this truly be me? My wife's eyes never left me. She moved around me with an effortless grace, adjusting a strand of hair that had fallen too far across my face, smoothing a wrinkle in the dress. Her touch was electric, grounding me yet pulling me further into this new version of myself, and every tiny gesture she made seemed imbued with a reverence I had never imagined I could evoke. "You're doing beautifully," she murmured, and I wanted to laugh and cry all at once, the words resonating like a melody that had been waiting for me my entire life. I caught my reflection again, this time leaning slightly forward, the light catching the high points of my face, the curve of my lips, the softness that had always been inside me but buried beneath years of rigid habit, of self-doubt. I thought about all the times I had looked in mirrors and pushed away the parts of me that didn't fit, the parts that whispered of something different, something daring. Now there it was, whispering back at me, louder, insistent, unrelenting. I felt a mix of awe and panic. What if I couldn't return to who I was before? What if I didn't want to? The stylist returned with a small palette of colors I had only seen from a distance, the brush delicate as a feather in their hand. They began with my eyes, teaching me subtle flicks, soft shades, tiny adjustments that completely altered my expression. The sensation of the brush against my lids made me shiver. I realized I was blushing, though I couldn't tell whether it was embarrassment or excitement, or some strange combination of both. I caught my own eyes in the mirror mid-motion, watching my gaze widen, soften, and shift. It was hypnotic, intoxicating. I didn't recognize the person looking back, yet somehow, I also felt more myself than I ever had. My wife crouched beside me, quietly coaching me, guiding my hand with hers. "A little lighter there," she whispered, and her voice, so soft and warm, felt like a tether holding me steady while the world beneath me seemed to dissolve. I followed her instructions with hesitant precision, feeling the brush glide across my skin, tracing lines that reshaped my face. The mirrors reflected dozens of angles, each one slightly different, each one teaching me how unfamiliar and yet natural this self could feel. I caught a flash of her expression, pride, desire, love, and it stirred something deep within me, a longing I hadn't acknowledged until now. When we moved to my hair again, I realized the transformation was not just external. The stylist combed through my locks, shaping, curling, layering, and each movement felt like an act of unearthing something buried, something vital. The smell of shampoo, the warmth of the dryer, the delicate pressure of the brush against my scalp, it was intimate in ways I hadn't anticipated. My thoughts spiraled. Who am I becoming? How far can I go before the reflection in the mirror becomes the only one I know? And yet, underneath the panic, there was exhilaration, an almost forbidden thrill that I had never allowed myself to feel. When the final touches of blush, lipstick, and mascara were complete, I froze for a long moment. I didn't move. I couldn't. My breath came in shallow, uneven bursts, and I was acutely aware of every detail. The tiny rise of the cheekbones, the softness of the lips, the curve of the shoulders, the delicate sway of the dress. Every element screamed of something new, something fragile, something breathtaking. My reflection was undeniably me, yet not. I felt simultaneously seen and exposed in ways that left my pulse racing, my heart hammering. My wife reached for my hand again, this time with a weight I could feel in her grip, as if she were anchoring me to the moment, telling me without words that I was allowed to exist here, in this body, in this self, without shame, without fear. I wanted to speak, to say something profound, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded, letting my eyes linger on hers, drinking in the quiet approval, the unspoken understanding. She smiled, and it was as if the room exhaled with me, a collective release that dissolved tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for decades. I thought about the world beyond the salon, the streets, the familiar routines, the people who would look at me and see only what they expected. A wave of fear washed over me. Could I carry this self outside, into light and motion, into the judgment of others? And yet, beneath that fear, there was a pulse of determination, a spark that whispered, maybe this self was the one I was meant to finally embrace. The reflection before me wasn't just a trick of mirrors or makeup. It was an unveiling, a revelation, a fragile promise that the self I had denied could not only exist but flourish. Time slipped by unnoticed. The mirrors reflected my nervous, trembling movements, my attempts to inhabit the body that felt both alien and intimately familiar. I practiced subtle gestures, turning my head just so, adjusting a sleeve, smoothing a lock of hair. Each movement became a tiny meditation, a rehearsal of identity, a test of courage. My inner voice, which had long whispered doubts and insecurities, began to shift, murmuring encouragement, curiosity, and even wonder. The transformation was no longer just external, it was seeping into my thoughts, reshaping my sense of who I could be. And through it all, my wife's presence was unwavering. Every glance, every gentle word, every reassuring smile tethered me to the moment, reminding me that I was not alone in this exploration. She had seen me, perhaps more truly than I had seen myself, and she had chosen to guide me here, into this delicate, dizzying space between fear and freedom. I realized then that transformation was not simply about hair, makeup, or clothing. It was about trust, love, vulnerability, and the courage to confront the parts of yourself you had hidden for too long. I reached out, touched the edge of the mirror, and saw a future I had never imagined. My reflection smiled back, tentative yet radiant, and I understood that the journey had only just begun. This was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of an awakening, a daring step into a self that had always been there, waiting to be seen, to be known, to be embraced. The moment I stepped out of the salon and into the warm glow of the evening, the air hit me differently, sharper, heavier, full of possibility and fear. The reflection I had just spent hours creating lingered in my mind like a memory, and yet the world outside seemed indifferent, ready to judge, to name, to classify me. I held my wife's hand tightly, feeling her strength anchor me, though my heart pounded with a rhythm I couldn't control. Every step felt like crossing a boundary I had long avoided, the pavement beneath my feet unfamiliar in its scrutiny, the streetlights flickering like spotlights on my insecurities. The dress clung to my body in ways that made me hyper-aware of every curve, every movement. I walked slowly, deliberately, aware that my reflection in the shop windows followed me, unblinking, unforgiving. I caught glimpses of myself, a stranger whose face was both mine and not mine, whose eyes carried fear and awe in equal measure. I realized suddenly that transformation was not only about what you could see, it was about what others would see, and what that reflected back into you. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. What would my coworkers say if they saw me tomorrow? How would friends react? Would laughter greet me? Or confusion? Or even outright judgment? The anxiety clawed at my chest, but underneath it, a strange pulse of excitement began to rise, a whisper that perhaps the world had not yet caught up with who I could be. Perhaps this version of me could exist openly, fully, without apology. My wife squeezed my hand, sensing my tension, and leaned close. "You look incredible," she whispered, and the words wrapped around me like a cloak. warm and protective, reminding me that at least one person in the world already saw the truth of me. We passed a small cafe, and for an instant, I froze, imagining the faces inside noticing me, evaluating me, labeling me. The fear was almost tangible, pressing against my ribs, but my wife's presence kept me rooted. "Breathe," she murmured. "You are exactly who you are meant to be right now." I nodded, drawing in a deep breath, feeling the weight of my own courage settle into my chest. The city around us moved in indifference, unaware of the seismic shift occurring within me, and I realized that maybe this was the point. The world would go on, but I could choose how I moved through it. When we reached our apartment, I hesitated at the door, hand on the handle, heart hammering. Inside, the mirrors reflected me again, multiplying my image, showing me from angles I had never considered. I turned slowly, studying myself, each gesture and sway of the dress revealing a new facet, a new possibility. The sense of exposure was intoxicating, frightening, and exhilarating all at once. I caught my reflection in the long hall mirror and paused, letting my gaze linger on the face that had been hidden for so long.
Who was I looking at?
Who had I become? As I explored the apartment, touching familiar objects that now felt strangely foreign, the couch, the kitchen counter, even the windowsill, I realized that the transformation had seeped into more than my appearance. It had begun to alter the way I thought, the way I moved, the way I perceived myself. The familiar routines of life felt like they had shifted subtly. My steps were lighter, more deliberate, my gestures softer, more fluid. I found myself examining my reflection in every surface, from the polished countertop to the refrigerator door, marveling at the way light and shadow played across my features. The evening deepened, and with it came a sense of solitude. Alone in the apartment, I began to confront thoughts I had avoided for years. Questions of identity, of authenticity, of belonging pressed against me. Could I exist in this body and still be me? Could I reconcile the person the world expected with the person I had just revealed to myself? Each thought brought a ripple of fear, but also clarity. Perhaps the self I had hidden was not a denial, but a promise waiting to be fulfilled. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the dress fall softly around me, and felt a sense of intimacy with my own reflection I had never experienced before. The next day brought its own challenges. Standing in front of the mirror in the morning light, I studied myself with a precision I had never allowed. The shadows of yesterday were gone, the contours of my face, the shape of my body, the subtleties of expression, they all seemed new, alive, demanding acknowledgement. I practiced subtle expressions, tilting my head, softening my lips, adjusting my shoulders. Every movement was a rehearsal, an experiment, a way of learning how to inhabit this new self in a world that might not understand. When I ventured outside, the city seemed both more intimidating and more inviting than ever. Every passerby could potentially see the transformation, could register the subtle shifts in my gait, my posture, my presence. Anxiety surged, but alongside it was a thrilling sense of autonomy, the realization that I could choose how I moved through space, how I presented myself, and how I internalized the reflections of others. With every step, I began to feel a rhythm, a confidence, a quiet assertion that I was no longer merely surviving in the world. I was beginning to inhabit it fully. My wife's support remained constant. She guided me through the streets, whispered encouragement, and celebrated even the smallest victories. A stranger's smile, a glance that lingered longer than expected, a compliment received. Each interaction, however minor, became a lesson in courage, in resilience, in the delicate art of being both seen and unapologetic. I began to notice the subtle ways my posture had shifted, the way my movements carried a newfound grace, and the way my own eyes lit up with recognition and delight. Evenings became a time of reflection. Alone, I would trace the line of my jaw, the curve of my cheek, the subtle arch of my brows. I would linger over the details that had once seemed irrelevant, reveling in the knowledge that these features were mine, newly revealed, and yet somehow eternal. I began to journal quietly, recording thoughts, sensations, fears, and triumphs, exploring the landscape of identity with a depth I had never allowed. Each word, each sentence, felt like a step toward full understanding, toward acceptance, toward self-love. Yet challenges persisted. There were moments of doubt that struck suddenly, an imagined glance from a neighbor, a remembered sneer from a colleague, a memory of a friend's laughter at some past awkwardness. Each fear clawed at my chest, threatening to undo the fragile confidence I had built. But in those moments, I would return to the reflection, to the dress, to the delicate application of makeup and remind myself, this is real. This is me. And slowly, the fear would ebb, replaced by a quiet, resilient determination. Stepping outside that morning felt different than before. The city had a sharper edge, the streets buzzing with a casual indifference that somehow magnified my own awareness. Every step carried weight. My reflection in the shop windows caught me again, and I paused, studying the slight curve of my lips, the tilt of my jaw, the subtle arch of my brows. The person staring back was unmistakably me, and yet, in a way that made my chest tighten with unfamiliar anticipation, entirely new. The sensation was electric, a blend of exhilaration and fear, of exposure and liberation. My wife linked her arm with mine as we navigated the sidewalks, offering an unspoken shield of reassurance. Yet, even in her presence, I felt the whispers of doubt. Would strangers stare? Would someone point or laugh? Each imagined reaction sent a spike of panic through my chest, yet beneath it all, a strange determination began to form. If I could inhabit this version of myself here, in the open, perhaps I could survive, and even thrive, in a world that might not understand me. We stopped at a small cafe, the kind with exposed brick and warm light spilling through the windows. The barista's eyes lingered for a moment longer than I expected, and I felt my stomach tighten. I fumbled slightly with my purse, adjusting straps, smoothing the fabric of my dress, aware of the small, intimate gestures that now seemed amplified. My hands trembled, not entirely from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. Every glance, every reflection, every subtle movement felt magnified, carrying a weight I had never experienced. Inside, I heard the hum of conversation, the clinking of cups, the quiet footsteps of patrons navigating between tables. I felt hyper-aware of the way I moved, the way I carried myself, the way my reflection occasionally caught in the polished surfaces. I realized that for the first time, I was navigating the world with a consciousness that extended beyond mere survival. Every gesture was deliberate, a quiet negotiation with my own emerging identity. My wife smiled gently, encouraging without intrusion, and I felt my tension ease just slightly. Then it happened. A man at the next table glanced at me and muttered something under his breath, a mix of curiosity and surprise. My chest tightened, my pulse raced. I felt a rush of self-consciousness, the familiar panic I had experienced countless times before. But this time, instead of shrinking, I drew a deep breath, reminding myself that I had chosen this path, that my existence in this form was valid. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and continued ordering my coffee with calm, deliberate grace. The tension didn't vanish, but it transformed into something else, a quiet assertion of self, a subtle but profound act of courage. We spent the morning wandering through streets I had known for years, but now seemed entirely new. The sunlight caught the soft waves of my hair, the delicate shimmer of makeup, the gentle sway of the dress with each step. Each reflection, each glance from strangers, each passing car became part of a vast, unspoken dialogue between myself and the world, a conversation about identity, visibility, and courage. I felt exposed, undeniably so, yet at the same time, alive in a way that was intoxicating. By the time we reached a quiet park, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. My legs ached slightly from walking, my chest still thrummed with residual anxiety, but beneath it all was a burgeoning sense of empowerment. Sitting on a bench, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, to let the sensations of the day settle. The wind teased strands of hair across my face, and I brushed them back, marveling at how something so ordinary could feel so intimate. The reflection in the small puddles on the pathway captured fragments of my form, soft, fluid, undeniably present. For the first time, I felt a sense of integration, as though my internal identity and external appearance were finally beginning to align. As the sun dipped lower, casting long, golden shadows across the park, I realized something profound. The world outside had not shattered me. It had tested me, yes, but each challenge had strengthened me, carved away layers of fear, and revealed a core of resilience I had never known. Even the moments of discomfort, the lingering glances, the subtle whispers, the tiny judgments, had become opportunities for growth, for assertion, for claiming space in a world that often refuses to notice those who are different. Returning home, the quiet intimacy of our apartment felt almost sacred. Mirrors reflected not only my image, but the journey I had taken in the past days, the transformation, the struggle, the courage, and the slow emergence of self-acceptance. My wife watched me with a mixture of pride and tenderness, and in her gaze, I found the affirmation that had begun to anchor my own sense of worth. I touched my face, my hair, the curve of my shoulders, and felt a deep, almost sacred connection with the person I had become. That night, alone in the quiet, I reflected on the enormity of the journey. Each public encounter, each glance in a shop window, each subtle gesture of self-expression had been a test, a confrontation with fear, and an opportunity for discovery. I realized that transformation was not a single moment, but a continuous process, a negotiation between who I had been, who I was becoming, and who I wanted to be. It was exhausting, yes, but also liberating in ways that words could barely capture. And as I stood once more before the mirror, I understood the depth of what I was experiencing. The reflection staring back was mine, undeniably so, yet it carried traces of every fear faced, every boundary crossed, every step taken into visibility. It was a record of courage, vulnerability, and emergence. I traced my hand along my jawline, over my lips, across the gentle slope of my cheek, and felt a profound, almost sacred recognition. This was me. All of me. Not borrowed, not hidden, not constrained. Fully present, fully alive. Even as I basked in that revelation, I knew the path was far from over. The world would continue to challenge me, to demand negotiation, to test the courage I had begun to claim. But for the first time, I felt capable of meeting those challenges, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with a quiet, steady confidence born of deep, intimate understanding. The reflection in the mirror, the dress, the soft waves of hair, the subtle makeup, they were not merely external adornments. They were extensions of a self I had long ignored, now fully embraced, now ready to meet the world without apology. And in that moment, with the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance, I felt a thrill of possibility I had never known. The journey was only beginning, and yet I was ready. Morning light spilled across the apartment, soft and golden, casting long shadows that traced the contours of the room. I moved slowly, deliberately, almost reverently, aware of the dress swaying against my legs, the softness of my hair brushing my shoulders. There was a quiet intimacy in these first moments of the day, a sacredness in simply existing as the self I had fought so long to acknowledge. The reflection in the mirror was no longer startling. It was familiar now, yet it still carried the power to unsettle me, to make me question what I thought I knew about myself, and that tension was intoxicating. Breakfast was silent, the two of us moving around the kitchen in an unspoken rhythm. I noticed the way my hands now handled objects, cups, utensils, napkins, with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the rigidity I had carried for years. My movements were softer, more deliberate, yet they felt undeniably mine. Each gesture was a small act of claiming the self I had long suppressed, a tactile affirmation that this body, this presence, was real and deserving. My wife watched me with that quiet, unwavering attention that had been my anchor through this journey, and I felt a warmth bloom in my chest, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and awe. The day called for errands, and stepping outside again brought with it the familiar rush of exposure. The city, vibrant and indifferent, seemed to heighten every sensation. I noticed glances, some fleeting, some lingering, catching fragments of my reflection in windows or the glint of light on passing cars. Each encounter sent a shiver through me, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I remembered the early days of this transformation, when even walking down the street had been terrifying. Now, however, there was a subtle shift. The fear remained, yes, but it was tempered by a quiet confidence, a growing awareness that I could navigate this world in this form and still exist fully. At the park, I paused to watch a group of children playing. Their laughter echoed in the air, innocent and unjudging, and for a moment I envied their freedom, their lack of self-consciousness, their ease in simply being. I realized that much of my anxiety came from layers of expectation, from decades of molding myself to fit external pressures. Standing there, feeling the sun on my skin and the soft fabric of the dress against my body, I felt a subtle shift, a recognition that I didn't have to shrink to fit the world's idea of me. I could occupy space unapologetically, gently, yet firmly. The reflective moments were interrupted by a brief, almost casual encounter that shook me more than I expected. A colleague passed by on the sidewalk, their eyes widening for a fraction of a second as they registered my appearance. I felt the old rush of panic, the heartbeat that seemed to hammer in my ears. And yet, something in me had changed. Instead of retreating, I held my gaze, offered a small, polite smile, and continued walking. The world did not collapse. The moment passed, but inside me, a tiny, powerful revelation took root. I could exist, fully visible, and not dissolve under scrutiny. The day grew longer, and with it, opportunities for reflection and small victories. Every mirror became a study, every window a test of presence. I practiced subtle gestures, the tilt of my head, the curve of my smile, the way my hands rested gently on my lap. Each movement felt like a negotiation between the self I had always been and the self I was embracing, a continuous rehearsal in inhabiting my identity fully. The mirrors reflected back not just my appearance, but the emotional layers of this journey. Fear, curiosity, pride, vulnerability, and an emerging strength that I could almost touch. Evening brought with it an unexpected challenge. We had arranged to meet a friend for dinner, someone who had known me long before this journey began. As I prepared, I felt a tremor of anxiety. What would they see? What would they think? Could I truly present this self without faltering? My wife sensed my hesitation, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You are enough," she said softly, and in that moment, I drew a deep, grounding breath. I understood that the challenge wasn't about others' perception. It was about my willingness to claim my identity openly, to meet the world on my terms, without apology or fear. The restaurant was bustling, filled with clinking glasses, murmured conversations, and the scent of cooked food. We found our table, and I felt the familiar flutter of nerves as my friend approached. Their initial glance carried surprise, curiosity, perhaps even a flicker of disbelief. I noticed the way my body tensed, the subtle shift of my posture as I braced for judgment. But instead of recoiling, I allowed myself to smile warmly, to speak gently, to inhabit the full presence of this self I had cultivated. The interaction was delicate, a negotiation of familiarity and change, and as the conversation unfolded, I realized something profound. Connection was possible, even with those who had known me before this transformation. Throughout dinner, I became acutely aware of the subtle shifts in perception, the way gestures, expressions, and presence influenced the social energy around me. I learned, almost instinctively, how to navigate these dynamics without losing authenticity. Each glance, each reaction, each moment of pause became a mirror, reflecting both who I was and who I was becoming. It was exhausting, yes, but also deeply enlightening. I realized that identity is not static. It is a continuous interplay between self-perception and external perception, a dance that demands both courage and attention. Returning home, the quiet sanctuary of our apartment felt restorative. I lingered before the mirror, tracing lines, studying expressions, rehearsing movements. Each gesture was both practice and meditation, a way of integrating the complex experiences of the day. I reflected on the courage it had taken to step into the world visibly, to navigate social expectations, to endure scrutiny and maintain presence. And yet, I also acknowledged the joy, the exhilaration, the profound sense of self-recognition that accompanied each small victory. As night deepened, I found myself enveloped in quiet reflection. The journey had become more than a physical transformation. It was an emotional, psychological, and spiritual awakening. I had confronted fear, embraced vulnerability, and begun to navigate the delicate interplay of internal and external identity with grace. Every glance in the mirror, every gesture, every interaction had been both challenge and revelation, shaping me into someone simultaneously familiar and entirely new. I touched my reflection one last time that night, feeling the smooth curve of my cheek, the gentle line of my jaw, the soft slope of my shoulders. And in that quiet, solitary moment, I understood. The journey was far from over, yet I was no longer afraid. I had discovered a resilience within myself, a courage born not from perfection but from authenticity, a strength that allowed me to inhabit my body, my presence, and my identity fully, unapologetically, and beautifully. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting narrow stripes of light across the bedroom floor, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to lie still, letting the quiet morning seep into every corner of my being. The reflection in the mirror across the room caught my eye, and I found myself staring, not with curiosity or disbelief, not with panic or self-consciousness, but with a quiet recognition, a deep, almost sacred understanding. This version of me that I had been unveiling in fragments over the past days, weeks, and months, was not a novelty, not a disguise, not a performance. It was real. It was me. I rose slowly, feeling the soft sway of the dress against my legs, the gentle weight of my hair brushing my shoulders, the familiar warmth of my own body finally reconciled with my mind. Every step I took across the hardwood floor felt deliberate, mindful, a small act of claiming space in the world. I traced my hand across my cheek in the mirror, feeling the softness there, the subtle curve of my jaw, the delicate arch of my brows, and I smiled. Not a tentative smile, not a nervous one, but a smile that carried the full weight of acceptance. I had traveled a long and winding road to reach this point, and finally, I could allow myself to simply be. The apartment felt alive with quiet significance. Every object, every surface, every corner seemed infused with memories of my journey. The hours spent practicing gestures, the careful application of makeup, the soft rustle of fabrics against my skin, the countless reflections that had both startled and reassured me. I remembered the first time I had dared to step into the world publicly, how my pulse had thundered, how my hands had trembled, how fear had coiled tightly in my chest. And yet now, I felt something entirely different. Courage had replaced panic, clarity had replaced confusion, and presence had replaced hesitation. I moved to the living room, where sunlight pooled across the rug and settled onto the couch. My wife joined me, sliding her hand into mine, her touch a quiet, unwavering reassurance that had carried me through every step of this journey. We sat in silence for a moment, letting the morning unfold around us, letting the quiet intimacy of shared space speak louder than any words could. I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for her presence, but for the way this journey had revealed parts of myself I had long denied. I was no longer hiding. I was emerging fully, unreservedly, and beautifully. The reflection of myself in the window caught my attention, and I studied it again, noticing subtle details I had learned to cherish. The curve of my lips, the softness of my cheekbones, the gentle strength in my posture. I realized that transformation was never merely external. It was internal, psychological, emotional, spiritual. Every step, every glance, every hesitation and triumph had shaped me into someone not entirely new, but finally authentic. And as I watched myself, fully present and fully visible, I felt a quiet, luminous joy settle in my chest, a sense of alignment between body, mind, and spirit that I had longed for without knowing it. The day stretched on with small, deliberate actions that became meditative in their intimacy. I lingered over breakfast, moving slowly, appreciating textures, colors, and sensations that had previously gone unnoticed. The brush of my hair against my shoulders, the gentle sway of fabric as I walked, the warmth of the sunlight on my skin. All these details carried new significance, transforming ordinary routines into rituals of presence. My wife watched me, her gaze soft, proud, and encouraging, and I felt a swell of love and recognition, both for her and for the journey we had undertaken together. As afternoon approached, we decided to venture out again, walking through streets that had once felt hostile, intimidating, or overwhelming. Now, however, they seemed less like arenas of judgment and more like spaces for exploration. Every window reflection, every passing glance, every subtle shift in posture was a reminder that I was inhabiting my body fully, asserting presence in a world that had not always been prepared to receive me. The anxiety that had once coiled so tightly in my chest still arose occasionally, but it was tempered by an unshakable sense of self. I had learned that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the willingness to move forward despite it. We stopped at a small park, the kind with winding paths and shaded benches, where sunlight dappled the grass and the air was filled with the distant laughter of children. I allowed myself to sit on a bench, letting the breeze play with my hair, letting my gaze wander over the world around me. And then I did something I had never done before. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to feel the totality of this transformation. Not just the hair, the dress, or the makeup, but the courage, the vulnerability, the strength, the liberation. I felt my heart expand, carrying with it a deep, abiding sense of authenticity. For the first time, I realized that the world outside could not define me. Only I could claim this space for myself. A family passed by, and for a moment, I felt the old twinge of anxiety, the glance, the whisper, the judgment that might be. And then I smiled gently, openly, fully, and felt a shift inside me. The world could observe, react, speculate, or ignore. It did not matter. My existence, my identity, my presence were not contingent upon external validation. They were mine. And in that realization, I felt a liberation so profound it left me trembling with wonder. Evening came slowly. The sky painted in hues of rose and gold, and we returned home. The apartment felt quiet, warm, intimate. I moved to the mirror once more, touching my face, brushing my hair back, adjusting the folds of my dress. And in that act of quiet reflection, I saw not a stranger staring back, but someone whole, someone resilient, someone unapologetically herself. Every line, every contour, every feature was a testament to courage, patience, and the long, intricate journey of self-experiment, not out of curiosity or fear, but out of recognition, out of love, and out of the deep, luminous joy of being fully, unapologetically myself. Acceptance. We spent the rest of the evening in quiet companionship, sharing small gestures, soft conversation, and moments of laughter that felt lighter and freer than they had in years. And as I lay down that night, the soft sheets cradling me, I reflected on everything that had led to this point: the salon chair, the scissors, the brushes, the mirrors, the first trembling public steps, the whispered encouragements, the moments of panic and triumph. Every experience had been a thread in the tapestry of transformation, each one necessary, each one shaping me into someone finally authentic. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly internalize a single, unshakable truth. I am not merely surviving in this body, in this self. I am thriving. I am alive. I am real. And nothing, no judgment, No expectation, no fear can take that away from me. The reflection in the mirror, the dress, the hair, the subtle movements, the strength, the vulnerability, all of it belongs to me, and I embrace it fully. I closed my eyes and felt a profound stillness, a deep connection with myself that I had never known. The journey had been long, fraught with fear, doubt, and uncertainty, but it had also been illuminated with courage, love, discovery, and profound self-recognition. I realized that transformation is never truly about appearance alone. It is about courage, vulnerability, authenticity, and the willingness to claim oneself fully, unapologetically, and beautifully. And in that quiet, infinite moment, I understood. This is not the end. It is the beginning of living fully, openly, and honestly as the person I have always been, now finally seen, finally known, finally embraced. The reflection in the mirror smiled back at me. And for the first time, I smiled too, not out of novelty or